Hello YouTube and welcome back to the garage. So first of all, apologies for the lack of videos lately. I've been a bit busy trying to sort out my milling machine and making the headlight brackets, which has taken a hell of a lot longer than it should have done. And then I just haven't been able to get out in the garage and get any work done on this little bike. So I'm afraid we're not going to get an update on the CB-1, but just to get back into the swing of things, I'm going to address a question that crops up quite often on Facebook and has popped up on the forums in the past. And that question is, can I fit a 180 rear tyre to the back of my CB-1? Well, to be honest, the short answer is no, you can't, because it won't fit, it will look stupid, and it'll bugger up your handling. But I guess you really want me to go into a bit more detail than that to justify that response. So, before we start, let's have a look at what tyres and wheels are fitted to the CB-1 as standard. So, at the front, which hopefully you can just about see in shot, you've got a 3-inch wide 17-inch rim, which takes a 110/70/17 tyre. And then at the back, we've got a 4-inch by 17 rim, and that takes a 140/70/17 tyre. Now, one of the reasons people quote for wanting to change to wider wheels and tyres is that it gives you a better selection of tyres. Well, I've never really had a problem with that, to be honest. There are some pretty good tyres out there that work really, really well on the CB-1. Certainly, as is fitted to this one, and these are probably my go-to tyres for everyday riding around, we've got BT45s. Now, they're not the most modern tyres. They're actually a cross-ply rather than a radial. But they do work really, really well on the CB-1, and they work well in all weathers. They're good in the rain, and they're pretty good in the dry. I use them on all my bikes. I think I've got BT45s on the CB-1, I've got them on the Moto Guzzi, and I've got them on my CBX 750. So yeah, you could say I'm a bit of a fan of the BT45. Like I said, they're a good all-rounder. They don't excel at anything in particular, but they just work really well in all conditions. If you're looking for something a little bit more sporty, well, there are two other tyres you can consider. The first one is the Pirelli Corsa Rosso. Now, they've been around for ages and they are still a really good tyre. Pretty grippy, really good if you're doing track days. Not the greatest of tyres in the wet, to be honest, though. I'd rather have a pair of BT45s on in the wet, but they're great tyres. The problem is they're a pretty expensive tyre for what they are. Another option, and this is the one I've got on my other CB-1, which is down the other end of the garage, we'll have a look at that in a little while, is the Bridgestone S20 Evos, again in the standard 110/140 combination. And I've done quite a few track days on them, and they are brilliant tyres. They're also a dual compound, which means that the centre of the tyre is a slightly harder compound than the edges. So what that means is when you're upright, for most of the time, you're not wearing the tyre out, but when you do lean the bike over, you go on to a slightly softer compound, giving you grippier rubber. They're brilliant. I've done loads of track days on them, and as you'll see when we go and have a look at those in a minute, even a middle-aged fat bloke like me can get the bike cranked over quite a way. In fact, the biggest restriction on a CB-1 to how far you can lean it over is that you'll actually grind the foot pegs. So we'll go and look at that in a minute. Finally, if you really, really want an all-out super sticky tyre, then Continental do their SM range, again in 110s and 140s. Now the SM stands for Supermoto, and it's a tyre that's been designed for the kind of nutters that ride supermotos. Super sticky tyres, and if they're anything like their race attacks, they're going to be brilliant. Just don't expect them to last very long, because they are a very, very soft and sticky tyre. So that's got rid of that argument. You know, there are some good tyres out there available for the CB-1, and yeah, so that gets that argument out of the way. But you're still insistent you want something a bit wider for looks, and I get that. That makes sense. So, can you fit a 180 tyre? Well, let's take some measurements. So, if I take the ruler and we measure from the edge of the existing 140 tyre to the inside of the swing arm, you've got about 25mm on this side. And if we do the same on the other side, between the chain and the tyre, you've actually only got about 15mm clearance. So for that reason, straight away, you're just not going to fit a 180 tyre in there. You can, however, if you really want to increase the size of your rear rim, you can go to a 160. And we'll have a look at some options on that. So, first of all, let's go and have a look at the Bridgestones, the S20 Evos, and I'll show you what good tyres there are. Like I said, I've done a couple of track days on them, and I really like them. So here are the Bridgestone S20 Evos that I've been running, and I've done a couple of track days on them. And as you can see, like I said, even an old fat bloke like me can get them pretty leant over and pretty scrubbed up. They're a really good tyre. I really rate them actually. And the one thing you do need to watch out for, as you can see, scraping the pegs is really easy to do with those tyres. So yeah, one word of caution: if you are planning on doing a track day on a CB1, make sure you take the hero blobs off the bottom of your pegs, because that will reduce your lean angle even more. And I have actually seen people dig them into the tarmac, which has really unsettled the bike. So yeah, that's the S20 Evos. As I said, I really rate them. I think they're a great little tyre. Okay, here we are back at the workbench. Now, if you really do want to go for a bigger rear tyre, so the 160, which really is about as wide as you can go easily, then your first port of call is probably something like this, an NC29 wheel. Now, the problem is NC29 wheels are becoming a bit harder to get hold of these days. Certainly I imagine for our friends over in the States, the NC29 wasn't really imported into the States very much. And also over here in the UK, well, firstly, all of those of us who race NC23s have probably snaffled them all and aren't giving them up for anyone. But also they're kind of skyrocketed in price now, so you're going to struggle to find an NC29 wheel for less than about £150 a go. So the other option you could look at would be a CBR 600 wheel, which is a very similar design to the NC29 wheel. And what you really want to do is you want to look for either an F2 or an F3 model. So the F2 was made from 91 to 94, and then the F3 was 95 to 98. And again, it's the same sort of 6-spoke design. The only problem is the CBR 600 wheel has quite a chunky sprocket carrier here, but it can be fitted, and I'll show you some photos a bit later on, courtesy of Eric from the CB-1 forum, of CBR 600 wheels fitted to his CB1. There is, however, one big problem with fitting either NC29 or CBR 600 wheels to the CB1, and that is the bearings. Now, the CB1 has a 17mm spindle, the NC29 and the CBR 600 have a 20mm spindle. So you can see we've got an issue straight away that the spindle isn't going to fit these tyres. So you may think, well, that's all right, I'll take the bearings out, I'll swap them over. Well, if you do take the bearings out, not only have you got to swap the bearings out, but you're going to have to swap this central spacer as well to one that's only a 17mm internal diameter, which isn't so easy to get hold of. The other problem is the standard Honda bearing, or standard bearing that Honda use on the 29 and the CBR 600 actually has a 50mm outer diameter. And I've looked everywhere, and as far as I can tell, nobody manufactures a bearing that's got a 50mm outer diameter and a 17mm inner diameter. So no matter what happens, you're going to have to find some way of adapting these bearings to work with your 17mm spindle. And that means you're going to have to find someone with a lathe. Now, I did mention Eric earlier on for letting me use his photos. Now, for those of you in the States, he's a really handy guy because not only is he really into his CB1s, but he also owns a machine shop. So he's probably a really good guy to get to know, and probably your first call to try and get some spacers made up. And you're going to need some special spacers. You're actually going to need some stepped spacers. And what these are is they have a 20mm diameter on the outside and a 17mm diameter on the inside. So you can see now our 17mm spindle will go through and they will fit inside the existing bearings on the CBR 600 stroke NC29 wheel. So you're going to have to do something a little bit different as well. Normally on the Cush drive you actually have a stepped bearing here. Well, that you're going to have to remove, and you're going to have to fit it in this bearing here, so that instead of coming from the sprocket bearing and going against the wheel bearing, you're going to have to do it the other way around. If you don't put something in that bearing, then that bearing isn't doing anything, and your wheel is just supported basically by the bearing on the disc side and the sprocket bearing, which again is just supported by rubbers. So you're going to need to make up a stepped bearing to go in here of the right width, and you can just measure the existing sprocket bearing. Then you're going to need another stepped bearing that goes in on this side, and a step bearing that goes in from the other side. So you're going to need 3 stepped bearings just to get the tyres to fit. And unfortunately I've not done the conversion, so I don't have the measurements. But like I said, if you're in the States, Eric is probably your man to speak to, because I'm sure, having already done the conversion, he's probably got all the dimensions to hand and he can make them for you. And if you don't want to speak to Eric about bearings, then he actually makes these as well, which is solid aluminium covers for the crankcase. A lot nicer than the chrome plastic jobbies that come as standard. So without further ado, just to prove it can be done, here's a photo of Eric's bike with the CBR 600 wheels on. The other great advantage of going with the CBR 600 wheels, even though they are pretty damn heavy actually, they're a lot heavier than the standard wheels, is you can actually fit CBR 600 front wheels on, so you keep matching wheels on your bike. They're going to give you a 3.5 inch front, which fits and clears the mudguard fine, but it does mean you're going to go up from a 110 front to a 120 front. So what you'll be running is a 120 front, a 160 rear, matching wheels. The only thing you're going to have to watch out for is you can either do a twin disc conversion using NC23 lowers, or you can actually fit the CB-1 disc onto the CBR 600 wheel on one side, but you do have to drill and re-tap the retaining bolts from 6mm to 8mm. But other than that, everything lines up. So it's a bit of a win. Like I said, you get your wider tyres, matching slightly more modern looking 6-spoke wheels, and everything's good. Well, there is just one little drawback. I mentioned about the handling. Now, one of the things I love about the CB-1 is it's a really flickable, easy to ride bike. And that in a large part is down to the tyre sizes. Going up to a 120 front, 160 rear, you do end up with a much larger contact patch. And so it does take a little bit more effort to get the bike leant over. But having said that, if you're going around a really long sweeping corner, once the bike is leant over, I do tend to find, certainly on having used this combination on the NC23, it does feel a lot more stable than the CB-1. Having said that though, and as I'll show you in a minute again, there's no problems with the existing tyres. You can really have fun on track with the existing tyres. So there we go. If you want to change tyres, well, you're not going to get a 180 on easily, but you can go for a 160, and that's how to do it. Now before I go, I know someone's going to raise a question about this bike here. And yes, he has got a 180 rear tyre on the back of that bike. And I have to say, I do like the bike. It looks great, and the 180 works because they've changed all the rear end. I think it would look pretty stupid if it was the stock rear end on that bike. So how has he managed to fit a 180 on there when I've just told you that it can't really be done? Well, anything can be done if you're prepared to do enough work. So the first thing he's done, as I said, a 160 is only just going to clear the inside of the swing arm. A 180 won't. So we can see from this photo that he's actually made his own swing arm and he's stepped the swing arm out. Now, I'm going to be honest, it's the one part of the bike I don't really like. I don't think it looks quite right, but you know, I'm not taking anything away from him. I still think the whole bike looks really good. That's just the one little detail I don't like. The other thing he's going to have done is he's going to have to move the front sprocket out to clear the tyre. So he would have had a spaced out front sprocket or an offset front sprocket. I don't know, I've not seen photos of what he's done, so I don't know whether he had one custom made or whether he has just spaced the standard sprocket out and done a bit of machining on it. But if you want to go 180, you are going to have to make your own swing arm, get a custom front sprocket made, and really for it to work, you're going to have to change all the back end because it's going to look bloody silly otherwise. So there we go. I know this is a bit of a pet peeve of mine and I was trying not to get into rant mode on this. Hopefully I've succeeded. But yeah, if you've got any questions about the 160 swap, give me a shout. And if not, there is a link down in the description to Eric's company. And yeah, if you're in the States, maybe he's the guy to speak to as well. So that's it. Hopefully we'll be back on the CB-1 shortly with a proper video. So until then, take care and I'll see you all soon.